HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Upstander, How Surviving the Holocaust Sparked Max Glauben's Mission to Dismantle Hate, by Jori Epstein. Foreword by Michael Berenbaum. Read by Jori Epstein. To Max's family, past, present, and future, and the souls he lost in the Holocaust, may their memory be for a blessing. Foreword. A moral titan. Simple truths emerge from complex stories. Jori Epstein's The Upstander, How Surviving the Holocaust Sparked Max Glauben's Mission to Dismantle Hate, is a powerful and poignant example of such simplicity within a complex narrative. Permit me to explain. Holocaust survivors were a small minority of the victims. Many more were murdered than survived. Max was the lone survivor of his immediate family. The question survivors faced, the question that Max asked himself, and Jori learned to ask in Max's name, is, what do you do with the accident of your survival? There is a powerful biblical story that I never understood as a child, but came to understand only after I was immersed in the study of the Holocaust. Lot, Abraham's nephew, his wife and 2 daughters, flee Sodom, which is reduced to ashes. Looking back, Lot's wife is paralyzed and turned into a pillar of salt. Lot and his daughters dare not look back, but travel on, looking forward and conceiving 2 great nations. What can we learn from this story of destruction, survival, and new birth? If, in the aftermath of destruction, one looks back too soon, like Lot's wife, one can become paralyzed by grief. One must move forward with the difficult but all-important task of survival. As you hear Max's story, you will understand how he rebuilt his life after the Holocaust. He survived by his wit and imagination in post-war Germany and immigrated to the United States. Only later, much later, did he begin to look back. Because they faced death, many survivors learned what is most important in life. Life itself, love, family, community, security, and what Holocaust survivor and Academy Award winner Gerda Klein calls a boring evening at home. For Jewish survivors, the survival of the Jewish people became paramount. Jewish history, and ultimately Jewish memory, are about life and not death, no matter how pervasive death may be. For so long, Max was silent, hesitant to open the wounds and confront the pain until a new generation was ready to hear his story. Yet once he spoke, he became so much more than what he and we could have imagined. For many survivors, including Max, bearing witness later in life confers a sense of meaning in light of the atrocities they suffered. Survivors tell the stories of what happened to them to keep a promise they made to those they left behind. More importantly, they hope, however slim that chance is, that their stories can transform the future. In service of this, the Dallas community and the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum have given Max a platform to teach and to become a beacon of conscience. He is a voice for pluralism and tolerance, for decency and humanity in the Dallas region and beyond. Who could have imagined that little Max could speak in a Texas A&M stadium, a field normally inhabited by giant Aggies and their massive opponents, delivering a counter-testimony to white supremacy. The 5'2" Jew spoke as a moral titan. Survivors were first told, "Don't go back to the camps. America is about the future, not the past. Progress, not history, is our most important product." But once Max looked back, once he wrestled with the pain and the grief, with the darkness and the loss, he found that going to the forbidden place empowered him. He found his calling, the reason why he survived. Max responded to survival in the most biblical of ways possible, by remembering evil and suffering to deepen humanity's conscience, to enlarge memory, and to broaden responsibility. This is precisely how the ancient Israelites responded to slavery and the Exodus. It is how survivors responded to the Holocaust. Max has enlisted young students as his allies. He speaks to all who will listen, again and again. Max transformed victimization into witness, dehumanization into a plea to deepen our humanity. Max has given us all an important legacy, along with significant responsibilities. Jori and the students who Max reaches in his talks and on his tours are the last to live in the presence of survivors. Just as Jori Epstein has done so graciously, so compellingly, so movingly in this book, we too can become witnesses to the witnesses. Further, we can transform what we learn from Max to better the world and prevent genocide. We can alleviate suffering and help heal its victims. Through close work with the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum to develop its new permanent exhibition, I have seen Max's impact, charisma, and charm. I have been with him on the March of the Living airplane as he began his journey back to Poland. Even though he was 80, he was energetic and driven, a man on a mission to teach, motivate, and share his experience with the wisdom that has come with age. Survivors such as Max have responded to 3 commandments that emerged from the Holocaust. Remember, do not let the world forget. Max fulfills that commandment every day in so many different ways, and now through Jori, his readers are invited to join in that effort. Max has been exceedingly candid in trusting Jori with his memories. The Hebrew poet Chaim Nachman Bialik described the 2nd commandment thusly: "And in their death they commanded us to life." Live life for each of them, says Max. Not any life, but a life of substance and significance. A life filled with concern for others and responsibility to our world. Max exemplifies fortitude and resilience, a man who has found his own unique way to contribute to our moral betterment. Emulate him. Become his partner in this endeavor. Never again is the 3rd commandment. Sadly, we live in a world where genocide has recurred time and again. We live in a world where some regard hatred as a mark of authenticity, where racism and xenophobia surrounds us, and where anti-Semitism has taken on new forms. Max and his generation have not defeated this demon. They depend on you to continue the task that remains unfinished. And if you become discouraged, remember a truth that Max has lived. Sometimes we must yell at the world to change the world. And sometimes we must yell even louder to make sure that the world does not change us. Michael Berenbaum, Project Director, U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, 1988 to 1993. Director, Siggy Ziering Institute at American Jewish University. Preface. Who is Max Glauben? It's just before noon on a September Sunday in North Texas. Close to 70 people from all walks of life gather at the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum, gingerly finding their seats before the Survivor Speaker program begins. Most aren't sure what to expect from the 5'2" octogenarian standing before them in his red, white, and blue checkered button-down shirt. But the 2016 audience is rapt. Max Glauben begins his talk. His sparkling blue eyes widen. His spirited gestures animate each carefully chosen word. Instantly, he puts his audience at ease. Max's thick accent has been subtly molded to the inflections of American English that he has taught himself during the 70 years he spent working and raising a family in the United States. But that's not where Max begins his story. Max begins with his birth in Warsaw, Poland, on January 14, 1928. It's a birth date not listed on his Texas driver's license, in his death camp papers, or in many of the other legal documents that offer glimpses, however contrasting, into his life. It is a life that has been checkered with death. He continues, guiding the audience through his pre-war life as the son and grandson of newspaper owners, as a student of Jewish culture, as a Polish youngster doing his best to live life in spite of the festering anti-Semitism ravaging communities surrounding his own. Max remembers vividly the deterioration of what had been a safe life for Jews in Poland. He still can't explain why that deterioration happened. Why, all of a sudden, did Nazi leaders force Jewish families like the Glaubens into a ghetto confinement? Why were Isaac and Samuel Glauben's newspaper offices burned to the ground, their neighbors eventually deported to labor and death camps? Max was just 15 when the Nazis murdered his mom, dad, and brother. He was 17 when American soldiers liberated him from the Nazis' hellish hold. So much hides behind Max's wrinkled smile, his sparkling blue eyes. So much is hinted by the crudely needled KL etched permanently atop his right wrist. So many memories. Max seems to remember them all, even as time elapses. The storied path from slave labor to liberation, from immigration to American Army service. He remembers settling in Dallas to become a businessman, family man, an active member of the Dallas Jewish community. He remembers when, after so many years of silence, so many years masking the past, he finally decided to shed light on the dark history he had lived, to become a mouthpiece for the many who were killed and couldn't tell their own stories. So Max will tell you that the 1.5 million children, 6 million Jews, and millions of others who were murdered in the Holocaust weren't just a mass aggregate of victims. No, Max will say, Each was a lost soul, a scientist, a musician, the next Albert Einstein, the next Elvis Presley, the next discoverer of a drug like penicillin. They were mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, sons, and daughters, taken from this world before their natural time. Max will try to fill their void and ascribe meaning to their lives after their deaths. On this day at the museum, like on so many days for the last 2 decades, Max will tell you about his life. He hopes he won't make you sad. He's careful to infuse humor and charm into stories of the horror he has lived through. After all, pain can't be duplicated, he'll tell you. He wants you to be an upstander, not be depressed. He wants you to bear witness, not lose faith in God or humanity. He certainly hasn't. So Max will tell you, and he will tell an auditorium of 900 people in McAllen, Texas, and he will tell thousands more at Texas A&M's football stadium. He will tell small groups of school children and a room full of survivors gathered together in Germany. He will tell high school groups that visit the concentration camps in Poland he was once shepherded between. He will tell you his life story, answer your questions, and be a face you can pair with an incomprehensible chapter of history so foreign to Americans living in peaceful times. He knows that reconciling these disparate chapters of his life can be confusing. Max hopes you'll leave not scarred by the death he saw, but inspired by the life he lives. Max might feel like your grandfather. He's okay with that. Husband, father, grandfather, and great-grandfather are among the many hats he wears. He doesn't take family for granted after losing so much of it so brutally. He relishes family gatherings with his 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and the 3 great-grandchildren now carrying his legacy. He enters a room, humming, smiling, his glistening eyes hinting at the wisdom he has gleaned, but belying the darkness he has endured. The darkness is there, though. Nightmares and physical pain still plague Max. So do nagging questions about what and whom he might have become. All of this lingering pain motivates him to ensure that the horrors he survived don't happen again. He longs to educate people who can't imagine what he's seen. At Texas A&M in December 2016, alt-right leader Richard Spencer was speaking across campus the same day, preaching ideas diametrically opposed to Max's. Weeks earlier, Max had already spoken to an audience of more than 600 in the same room Spencer now occupied. But Max returned to College Station to preach unity during Spencer's visit. Upon his arrival, he greeted his granddaughter Delaney, a Texas A&M student. Delaney beamed as her Zadie crossed Kyle Field before a packed stadium. "It's a whoa moment," she said. "Hopefully hearing my Zadie's story will help them see what hate has caused. They will also see how the desire to combat hate has motivated this Holocaust survivor to persist in 3 countries, 6 languages, and culture after culture for more than 90 years. As the number of Holocaust survivors dwindles, Max Glauben preaches tolerance and strength in the wake of persecution and division. Max's chief concern in telling his story is to deliver testimony without creating hate. He wants to spur listeners, to spur you, to be upstanders, not bystanders. If you have any hatred, bigotry, or anti-Semitism, he says, I hope that after you read this book, you might change your mind. This book is the story of Max Glauben, a resident of Dallas, Texas, and a survivor of the concentration camps Majdanek, Budzin, Mielec, Wieliczka, Plasza, and Flossenburg. This story is the story of one man, and yet it is the story of so many. Max hopes it will never again be the story of any. Upheaval. Chapter 1. High Pain Tolerance. Even as a toddler, Max Glauben was different. Max was taken to the hospital, as the story goes, to have his tonsils removed. The doctors didn't put him to sleep for the procedure. I was real little and the instruments were hot, Max says. They burned my throat and they didn't give me a sedative. Then the surgeon carried his 3-year-old patient out into a room full of doctors and nurses. There's a kid whose tonsils we took out and he didn't even cry, the surgeon bragged. Max shrugs at how his earliest memory could have been a scarring, physically and psychologically, experience. My pain tolerance has always been great, he says. He would need that. Max Moniek Glauben was born to Fela Hoffman and Isaac Glauben in Warsaw, Poland on January 14th, 1928. He was born on a Saturday, the Jewish Sabbath, which spurred family lore about a Friday night trip to the hospital. Max remembers elder family members later trying to convince Fela that Max was born in February, not January. He just laughed. Why would they know better than the mother who birthed him? No one yet knew how important Max's birth date would become during the war. For the first 10 years of his life, Max and his parents lived an unencumbered life in their small Warsaw apartment on Mila Street, number 38. Max's brother Henryk was born 2 years after him. Fela presided over the household, cooking every meal and parenting the 2 boys who shared a bed. Isaac worked in the newspaper industry by day and as a bookbinder and de facto community accountant by night. He had always been arithmetically inclined, says Max, who inherited that gene. Max and Henryk attended the local Tarbut, or Jewish culture school, on Geisha Street. Max remembers going back and forth between Geisha Street and Mila 38, taking the steps 2 at a time up to the 4th floor apartment each day when he returned home. He would then go to the neighborhood bakery to pick up bread, and to the Mila 38 synagogue for afternoon and evening prayer services. Max loved visiting his father and grandfather's newspaper offices on Lashna Street. The family newspaper business was multifaceted. Isaac ran the Yiddish-language newspaper called the Jewish Daily that appealed to more secular Zionistic Jews. Max's grandfather Samuel, Isaac's father, kept up the Jewish Express, which featured more traditional Orthodox perspectives. Each appeased a clannish group of Jews, Max says, updating readers about everything from politics to the weekly Torah portion. Paper distribution spanned Greater Poland, France, Belgium, and more. An archive copy lists all other lands as a delivery choice. The Yiddish language papers remained indiscernible to the non-Yiddish speaking Nazis on the cusp of their 1939 invasion of Poland. Thus, the newspapers became a vessel of warning in a 1930s era of what Max calls hushness. The Jewish people were scared, Max says. Don't say anything. Someone might hear you and hurt you. What the papers tried to do was distribute the news to the public at large, because families themselves were afraid to say anything for fear that if someone hears it, they'd harm them. Max didn't care much for the paper's substance, their advocacy, or their interpretations on the weekly Torah portion. He didn't speak Yiddish anyway, so he couldn't read the articles emanating from his father's printing presses. But Max loved watching Isaac fire up the presses for each new issue. He was fascinated with how his dad would count the copies of each issue, wrap a bundle with wire, twist the wire tightly, and then break the wire piece by hand. As copies piled up for distributors to collect, press workers kept count with a bell loud enough to wake someone up if they were asleep, Max says. He observed quietly and taught himself to use some of the machines. Max paid close attention as workers maneuvered the linotype machine, selecting letters with a band and lever, then filling each in with a bucket of lead. No one told Max where to find the letters or how to ensure they materialized on the paper. But after he watched a few rounds, Max began cranking out his own stamps with the cylinder and paper contraption. Sometimes he pressed his Polish name Moniuk. Other times, his Hebrew moniker Mendel. Each time, he prided himself on finding a solution and making a finished product. I was a youngster that never asked questions, Max says, because when I looked at something, I could realize how 2 and 2 doesn't make 5 or 3. Max wishes he could have visited the offices more often, but with anti-Semitism already festering in pre-war Europe, walking outside Jewish quarters to the office at Lashna 40 left Max vulnerable to scrutiny from the greater Polish society. Polish children would throw objects at him. At least when the Jewish children were bigger, the Polish children sometimes retreated in fear, Max says. His parents wouldn't address the anti-Semitism explicitly. Max says they didn't need to. Anytime he ventured outside his Jewish school, Jewish apartment complex, or the Jewish shops, he sensed a change in the demeanor of those around him. Neighborhood kids would taunt Max. Trips to his father's office at Lashna stood out. When we went there, if we were not hurt physically, we were hurt visually and then maybe just verbally, Max says. It was an environment I don't wish for anyone to live under. If you were not bullied and not hurt, the looks were killing. He began to learn more. The boxing gloves taught him one lesson. Max was 7 or 8, he estimates, and attending school on Geisha Street. The separate Jewish Atid school served 2 purposes. First, it enabled kids to receive a proper religious education. Max studied secular subjects like Latin literature, arithmetic.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?